My husband and I, several years back, began forming our consulting company that's called Broken Sheep, because we're all, and our flocks are all just a bunch of broken sheep, aren't we? What happened is my husband, he is actually the vice president of marketing for a global software company that's based out of France. So probably if you're driving a car, their software helped build that. It's named Dassault Systems, but he's a marketing expert in this company. And one of churches began to come to him and I saying, we need marketing and branding help. We don't know how to advertise our church and stuff like that. And so that's where our bread and butter and Broken Sheep started. But then as we started working with churches, we can brand the heck out of your church, but the reality is if you don't have a good product, people are going to see that. Do you know what I mean? Do you ever see something and you're like, that looks so cool, and then you go out and buy it and you're like, this is not living up to the promises. This is not living up to the expectations. So it opened up a whole new venue of consulting for us, where we began working with local churches at a very hands-on, tactical level, helping churches have the product that they were advertising. So it kind of happened backwards. You would think you would start with the product and then advertise it, but the way our consulting firm developed, we were helping churches market things, but then we kind of, from a conscientious level, was like, we can't really market this way, because this is not really what is the reality of these congregations are. And I'm sure if you're a pastor or even a lay person very involved with your church, you feel that tension sometimes, don't you? That at a very tactical, basic level, my church is not everything that I wish it would be for people who are looking for a church home. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. And it's not that your church isn't awesome. Okay? Your church can be super awesome, but there are things that it needs to work on to really be kind of the Coca-Cola of your community churches. So John asked me to come here and touch on two very specific things that we wanted to address in your churches. This morning we're going to be talking about outreach events, because outreach events, it used to be, how many of you remember the days? I don't remember the days, but apparently there's a day where if you build, they will come. How many of you remember those days? Build a church, make it big, make it pretty, open the doors, and people needed somewhere to go on Sunday morning. So they would, where did everybody go in the 1950s on Sunday morning? Church, right? How many of you know that's not the reality we're living in today? Now people go golfing and to Starbucks and to play soccer, right? That's the reality we live in. Can we change that reality? Yes or no? No. So churches have to reach people in a different way. We need to find a different channel to get people to think about coming to church. See, we're not just trying to get people to come to our church. We're just trying to get them to think about coming to any church at all. Okay, because we don't live in this age anymore. You talk to people and you're like, well, religion comes up and you're like, well, what religion are you? What do they say? I'm what?
I'm spiritual.
Yes!
I'm spiritual, but I don't go to church.
But not religious.
I don't believe in organized religion.
I don't believe in organized religion, but I'm spiritual, right? Raise your hand if you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. Awesome, we're living in the same reality. Yeah. And so what my years of ministry taught me, and what my husband and I's experience working with churches all over the United States have taught us, is that churches need a venue to get people to start thinking or rethinking about what spiritual means. What does it mean to be spiritual? And is my brand or my form of however I would classify being spiritual need a faith community to connect with? Okay, so what we're really doing with these outreach events is we're kind of challenging people to rethink their idea of what spirituality is in a non-threatening way. Okay, so let's talk about what an outreach event is. An outreach event is an event that is created and implemented solely for the purpose of introducing your church to the community. That's all it is. Okay? How many of you do outreach events and you think next Sunday the pews should be packed, right? It's not how it works. The very first church I was appointed at, is anybody familiar with Cincinnati or the Cincinnati area? Was in Loveland, Ohio. Does that mean something? Okay. So if you know, Loveland is a suburb of Ohio. At the time when I was serving there, it was kind of this emerging kind of suburb in Ohio. And we were, if you're familiar with Loveland, Ohio, across from a new church plant, across from a golf course. Okay, so just so you can have a little context of where my first appointment was. But it was a new church plant, and it had only been there, it was not even 8 years old when I started there. And the great thing about being at a church and cutting your ministry teeth on a church that was less than 8 years old is people don't say, we've always done it that way before, because they've never done things before because they're only 8 years old, right? So I learned ministry and outreach events underneath this amazing umbrella of free thinking, okay, of let's just try it and see what happens, okay? How many of your churches are afraid of change?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, change is super hard. For those of you who think you're good at change, I'm going to take your cell phone away from you. Or I'm going to give you a cell phone to make you use it. Pick whichever category you fall into, okay? How many of you know you might die if someone took your cell phone away from you permanently? Like how you get in a car and know where you're going, right? Okay. So change is hard. And so I want us to talk about outreach events in terms of helping our churches understand what outreach events are. Outreach events are like first dates. Okay, so how many of you have ever gone on a first date? How many of you hate first dates? Yeah, I tell my husband all the time, if he dies, I'm not marrying anyone else again. Nope, that's just not happening. I spent too much work breaking you in. I'm not breaking another one in, okay? You know what I mean, right? Like relationships are work, amen? So let's talk about a first date. What kind of things happen on a first date? Let's keep it Disney rated. Although Disney's got a little racy lately, so I'm just rated G. Let's keep it rated G. Okay, so you try and make a good impression, right? So like, gentlemen, you shower before a first date, right? Hey, in my house, when my husband and I go on a date, showering is not a prerequisite anymore, is it? What else might happen on a first date?
Get to know each other.
You just get to know each other, right? You ask each other questions, okay? What other things happen on a first date? I heard something, but I didn't hear what you said. What did you?
Flowers.
You bring flowers or gifts. Does she have to pay for those? No. They're free? You give her free flowers? Shut up. Shut the front door.
The check.
You split the check? Well, I know who's not going on a second date, don't we, ladies?
I've got a young friend that on the first date, the woman who's now his wife said, I want 4 children. And he
That's a little forward.
He showed up for the second date. They do have 4 children.
She's a woman who knows how to get what she wants, isn't she?
Yeah.
What else happens on a first date? Food, okay? It's usually food at a first date, right?
Sure.
It kind of helps overcome the awkwardness of having to talk all the time, right? Or you can always talk about the food if you can't talk about anything else and it's an awkward date. Does every first date lead to a second date?
No. Nor needs to.
Nor needs to. Exactly. Okay? So if we think of outreach events as like a first date, we just really put ourselves in a healthier mind frame for what we're trying to do. Does that make sense? My church, that Epiphany that I talked about, we used to say a person needs 1,000 touch points before they come to your church. Does that make sense? George Bush had his 1,000 points of light. We had our 1,000 touch points. The community needs to see our name, our logo, our name mentioned in the neighborhood 1,000 times before they really feel comfortable coming to your church. Does that make sense to you? How many of you know we live in an age of deception and shysters?
Sure.
People put churches in that same boat. We don't maybe deserve it, but that's the reality. right? So what would happen if on a first date someone asked us to marry them? Is that an appropriate first date scenario? No. But that's what churches want. Come to our outreach event, come to church next Sunday, and then you can join the Sunday after that, right?
Puts you in a place of leadership.
Yes, and we'll put you in charge and you can serve in the nursery. Probably not a good idea, right? That's why people run away from churches. They're not ready for that level of commitment. That's just the first date. Okay? So, let's talk about how in other ways, and we mentioned some how outreach events are like first date. It needs to reflect your church's best. Okay? So how many of you have ever done something and then after you did it, you didn't feel very proud of what you did? It's okay. It's all right to admit that. But it needs to be our best foot forward. Gentlemen, we're showering and shaving and bringing flowers, right? Because we want to make a good first impression. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we have outreach events, we're trying to make a really, really positive, good first impression on those people who come to those outreach events. I mean, don't show up at your first date and be like, I'm unemployed, I live with my mom, I don't have a car, right? Okay, this isn't my car, it's my best friend's car. Like, that's probably, like, every church, there's no such thing as a perfect church, amen? Okay? If there is, don't invite me, I will ruin it. And so it's, put your best foot forward. It needs to cater to the needs of the community. Churches, I love you. I love the local church. That's why I do what I do. Okay? But your idea of outreach events are just kind of messed up. Okay? I love your choir, but no one wants to come to hear your choir sing as an outreach event. Is it that your choir is bad? No, it's not that your choir is bad. It's that the idea is not to show, it's to appeal to the community. Okay, if going to a choir concert isn't in need of a need of your community, it's not a good outreach event. Okay, so we want to, and what I really want to hammer home, that outreach events are contextual. They need to speak to your specific community. You can't do what someone else did, pick it up, replicate it, and drop it down at your church and get the same results. It's not going to happen. I want to emphasize that to you. What works for your church isn't going to necessarily work for your church. Okay, because different people in different communities and different settings are living with different needs. Amen? And so make sure that when you do this, and we're going to talk about, I'm going to give you some tips about how to find the right outreach event for your church. But focus on your community. What does my community need? Your community needs something. It may not be obvious what they need, but there's something that they need. Okay? Be hopeful, but not high commitment. Isn't that true of a first date? I hope, just like the guy, I hope this could be the one. But seriously, when we go on a first date, do we expect it to be the one? No, not really, right? We're just excited if they return our text, right? If I'm still in the right world. Okay. So I want to talk to you about how after leaving this church, I was an associate there. I was still in seminary. I finished my seminary work and it was time for me to get my own church. How many of you remember that, your first church? We're so hopeful, aren't we? We're so full of naivete, so to speak. And I go into my district superintendent's office. He calls me, he says, I have an appointment for you. And I'm like, yes, right? We're super excited. So I go into my office and my district superintendent, does anybody know that Greg Stover, okay. So I go into Greg Stover's office and I'm like, I'm pinging off the walls. I can't wait to hear where I'm going to be appointed. And I go into his office and he says, we have a special appointment for you. How many of you know I'm in trouble already? I'm like, well, how special is this appointment? And he says, I have an inner city church for you. I'm like, okay, I'm not scared of that. Keep on going. He goes, but it's almost dead. He's like, there's about 30 people in it. And he was right. My first Sunday, I go in there, 30 people, the most beautiful group of seeding dandelions I have ever seen. What am I trying to tell you?
There's some life, but then again.
Yeah, not much. People capable, but all retired. They were all retired. I was the youngest person by about 25 to 30 years, okay, in that church. So still, you know, somewhat active, but they're not going to run a marathon anytime soon, okay? And he says they have about a year, maybe 2, for you to turn this around. After that, we'll be shutting the doors. How many of you thought I was less excited about my first appointment when I left that room? I did what any good pastor would do. I went home and I cried. Now, don't act like you wouldn't have done that. And as I'm telling my husband all this, my husband's like, this is awesome. And I said, you need to work on your listening skills. He said, no. If it dies, no one's going to blame you. It was dead when you found it. He's like, this is like finding roadkill and bringing it back to life. He's like, you're in great shape. If you can make good of this, you will be like infamous in the role of United Methodism. They're like, Lazarus, rise, kind of thing. Not to compare myself to Jesus, because it ain't even a thing. But I was like, well, okay, I'm going to give it my best shot. So I did indeed go in there, 30 people. Not even 30, less than 30 my first Sunday, like 20 people in the sanctuary my first Sunday. How many of you thought I was like, ooh? And so I'm like, we need to do something here. Inner City Church, it was a working class community, and it felt very much to these 20 people in the pews like they woke up one day and like everything had changed underneath their feet. That's what it felt like to them. Some of them had moved out to the suburbs. Some of them still lived in that community. How many of you know the community I'm talking about, okay? But these people loved the Lord and they loved their church. And I thought, I can do something with this. They love the Lord and they love their church. I don't care if there's only 20 of them. I don't care that they're elderly. I don't care. They want to do something. So I thought, I can't do it with 20 people. Not a whole lot. So I said to the people, we're going to have a school fair. They said, what? I said, a school fair. A what? Just follow my lead. Show up. I said, this is what I'm going to call all hands on deck event. What does that mean? Everybody's going to do something. Okay? And they're like, well, we can't do that. I said, yes, you can. I said, can you sit in a chair and hand out popcorn? Yes, then you can participate. Can you donate $20 for the event for school supplies? Yes, I can. Can you buy notebooks and bring them in? Yes, I can. Then we can do this. How many of you, your churches are like, we can't do that, and you just, poor us, we're little, we can't do anything. Church pity party. Okay? So I'm like, you have your pity party, and we're going to move forward. You can keep on pitying yourself until you don't pity yourself anymore, but we're going to move forward. And I'm going to show you pictures from the 3rd annual school fair that we had. They're around the block of the church. Okay? This is an aerial picture from the 2nd floor of the parsonage.
Wow.
How many people did I have the first Sunday?
20.
They took a risk. As Inner City Church, people need basic things, right? This is how we did it. Now, sitting down, it's not hard. You pack all the school supplies in those cheap little Oriental trade bags ahead of time. The people come as Inner City, you just gotta be careful. They get a ticket for their food, and a ticket for their school supplies. Fair enough? They stay in line, they give us a ticket, they get their school supplies, they give us a ticket, they get a hot dog, a bag of popcorn, a bag of chips, and a drink box. They go through, that's the back along that yellow building is where the food is, okay? And then where you see everybody lined up along the churches where the school supplies are. The one booth is a face painting booth. The other booth is like a little craft booth with like little coloring pages and things like that, okay? Another booth has like helium balloons at it, okay? How many of you, these are not crazy things, okay? As it grew, we got a bouncy ride. I mean, basic stuff, right? We got a bouncy ride. As we grew, like, we invited the police to come, okay? The fire to come. They have to do those things. They're required in their job to perform so many hours of face-to-face community service. They are thrilled when your church calls and says, would you please come to our event? And guess how much it costs? It's free. Are any of these things by itself super expensive? Helium balloons, are they super expensive? No. Bouncy ride for one day, is it super expensive? No. Okay. Outreach events. So this is where I cut my teeth on outreach events, okay? Church of 30 people, outreach events, I think we got up to like 3,000 people. City, Price Hill, if you're familiar with Cincinnati, okay, Price Hill community. And by the time I left after my 6 years, we were worshiping at over 120 on an average Sunday. It's not me, don't be oppressed. So if you hit the outreach event right, you're getting the proper presence in the community, okay? All right, so let's talk about, I would be reminiscent if I didn't say you can have the best outreach things in the world, but if you don't have a healthy church, people won't continue to worship there, okay? Some factors in a healthy church is a biblical understanding of your purpose. If you don't know that you're supposed to reach out and save people's souls, you don't care about reaching out and saving people's souls, right? Okay? Loving conflict resolution. Every church has conflict. Is that right, Dr. Hatton? Every church in your district has conflict. Every church I've ever worked with has conflict. But healthy churches do it in a loving and healthy way. Okay? Sense of team and servant leaders. The church I was serving, that inner city church, had those things. If your church is lacking in some of these areas, I might recommend that you do some work in those areas as you're doing your outreach and hospitality things. These are things that have to be fixed in your church before they grow, because healthy things grow. Okay? All right. How many of you have a mid or small sized church and something like a school fair seems really overwhelming to you? You think, can my little church do that? And the answer is yes. Just some tips for you before we go forward and you get overwhelmed. Don't get overwhelmed, okay? Partner with others, all right? As the school fair grew, like my first year at the school, we did the school fair. One of the little ladies at our church says, can my family come and help? Well, what do you think my answer was? Yeah. I don't know why we think every volunteer we have at these events has to come from our church. It doesn't have to. How many of you are in a school district where the children are required to complete community service hours? Right? Guess what? That's a volunteer pool. All right? So think about your volunteer pool different. Partner up.
Beta Club.
Yeah, Beta Club or whatever. Partner with whoever you need to partner with to get your job done. It's okay. All right? So small churches, if you're going to do big things, you have to partner with your community, okay? Does that make sense to you? You don't have to do it all, but you do have to do it. It does have to get done. Think big. I find the biggest issue I have with churches is they think small. How many people do you want to come to this event? Oh, we'll be happy if 100 people come to this event. You need to think bigger. Because what happens if you plan for 50 people and 1,000 people show up? You're in trouble. You ain't running that event again next year. Because the rumor will get out. They weren't prepared for the crowd. Okay, so think big. And you can think big in healthy ways, like buy the bottled water, but don't open it all. Costco will take that stuff back, okay? So just be prepared, think big. And think strategically about your labor, and we talked about that briefly. So I want to talk about partnerships. The last church I served, Wapakoneta United Methodist Church, they said, can we have an egg hunt? I said, sure. When your lady said, can we have an outreach event? The answer is always what? Yeah. Sure. So I wasn't super excited about an egg hunt. It's a great outreach event. It's kind of generic, right? It's a little generic, didn't have a whole lot of personality to it, but I'm like, sure. So as it turns out, we were the biggest egg hunt ever in Wapakoneta, but we had a limited facility. We didn't have a lot of grounds. There wasn't a lot of green space around our church. So I'm like, the first year we had it, I think there were like 500 people there. And I'm like, we can't grow. This event can't grow at all. We'll talk about how I got 5 people there later in the presentation, I promise, okay? So I'm like, we can't grow. This event has no place to grow. So that same year, who knows why Wapakoneta, Ohio is famous? Just had our 50th anniversary, didn't we? It's the home of Neil Armstrong. You know who Neil Armstrong is, right? And so that same year, the Neil Armstrong Museum had an egg hunt, but they only put out like 300 eggs. How many of you think that's a bad idea? And it was all over social media how much the community now hated the Neil Armstrong Museum because they threw a yucky egg hunt. Now think about your kid. Now that I know you're thinking, what's the big deal? Think about your kid crying because they did not get candy at an egg hunt. How many of you know you don't want to, right? It's not the impression you want to leave with your community. That's why I said be prepared, okay? So I get word they threw a horrible egg hunt. We threw an awesome egg hunt. We have no facility, but this is the museum grounds. What do you think I'm thinking? I can hide literally a ton of eggs there. So small community, 7,000 people in Wapakoneta, Ohio, because all we got for us is basically that Neil Armstrong grew up there. And so I'm at lunch one day, happened across the way, because there's only like 4 places to go to lunch there. Across the way is the director and the chairman of the board of, guess what? The Neil Armstrong Museum. And this is like 2 weeks after this yucky egg hunt happened. A small community, I walked up, I'm like, hey, how are you guys doing? I'm like, I heard you guys had an egg hunt. And like the eyes dropped, and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, actually, we had an egg hunt too. They're like, yeah, we heard. It was like, yeah, we heard your egg hunt was also, it was a little like, did you come over here to rub this in? You know? And I'm like, actually, I said, I had a really great idea and didn't know if you guys would be interested in partnering with WAPOC First next year, where we would provide the labor, the eggs, all that stuff, and you would partner with us and let us use your facility. Their eyes lit up and they're like, yes. Because their issue is they don't have enough people to stuff eggs. I have a pool of 400 people to stuff eggs, okay? So, this is 2 years later. This is a town of 7,000 people that have 3,000 people there to hunt Easter eggs. You do the math. Okay? Not expensive. Walmart provided all the candy. We just put on every flyer we put out, candy generously donated by Walmart. Fair enough? Okay. Yeah. These plastic eggs are super cheap. It's like $50 for 1,000 of them. Easter egg hunts conveniently happen at what time of the year? That is awesome time, right? All right. Let's talk about what your church should be doing, okay? So we're going to do an exercise, but you cannot use an egg hunt or a school fair. I'm just going to take that safety net out from underneath you. So you have to ask yourself several questions before you pick your event. The first is, who are we trying to reach? You're trying to reach children with young families. If you're trying to reach senior citizens, an egg hunt is not a good outreach event, is it? Okay? So think about the demographic of people who you're trying to reach, okay? After you've identified, now I'm going to warn you, if you sit down and people and ask them who we're trying to reach, they're going to say, we want to reach who? Everybody. You can't reach everybody. How many of you have pastors have discovered you can't make everyone happy all the time? The same thing applies to outreach events. You can't make an outreach event that's going to attract everybody and appeal to everybody. You have to pick a demographic. And it's hard to do because you're not saying, we love these people more than we love these other people. That's not what it's about. But if you make an event for everyone, you've made an event for no one, and that's who will come. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So clearly, with the A count, we're trying to reach who? Young families. Families with school-age children. Okay? All right. What are the felt needs of that demographic? Not what do we think they need. What do they think they need? Churches are famous for making outreach events and gearing them towards what we think that young family needs, right? We think you need this. Well, they don't want to admit that they need that, right? So we have to find the space of what they need. Suburbs, your key demographic, diapers and debt. Raise your hand if you know who I'm talking about. Diapers and debt, okay. Those families need free entertainment, free quality entertainment. They are paying the bills, they're barely making it, but they can't afford to do the extra things. Okay, does that make sense to you? So if you're in that demographic, you're talking about entertainment focused events. Okay, what would I like to do with my family that I can't afford to do with my family that the church can provide that service? Okay, if you're inner city, people need basic things, right? School supplies, food, coats, some fresh clothes in the spring or in the fall when it's time for the kids to go back to school. Okay, affluent communities, people need connection. Okay, people need safe spaces. And when I say connections, it's not always a healthy connection. Do you know what I mean? They want to be connected to other people, networking, okay? So just think really hard about your community and what they're looking for. They're looking for safe spaces for them and their children, okay? Next, what would they like to do? How many of you are not in the demographic that you're trying to reach? It's okay. I'm not anymore. My daughter's grown on her own. I'm not in the demographic. I've aged out. All right? So I found that like I'm spending a lot more time than I used to, like when I was in the cool kid zone. You know what I mean, the cool kid zone? I've moved out of the cool kid zone. So when I was in the cool kid zone, these outreach events came very naturally to me. But since I've migrated slowly, I may add, out of the cool kid zone, I have found that I need to spend more time with families in that demographic, asking them, what do you do? What did you do this weekend? So all you have to do is find people. They don't even have to go to your church. Find people in that demographic and say, hey, what did you do this weekend? What are you doing next weekend? What would you like to do? Okay? So is that hard? Worst comes to worst, there's always Google. Okay? Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify trends and latch onto the trends and move with them. The world will not stop for the church. Amen? How many of you have discovered that the world is not stopping for the church? So our outreach events are still relevant, right? We have to move with the trends. And when I share at the end of this, I'm going to just share a list of what we found, depending on your demographic, successful outreach events, but you're going to see trends, okay? Next year, this list will look totally different. When I do this training, I will have crossed off outreach events and added new ones on. As a matter of fact, Eric and I are working with a church now to develop this like kind of, I'll explain it, but we've hooked onto a trend and we're trying to develop it appropriate for a church because this trend usually has liquor attached to it. So we're trying to recreate it so it's church appropriate. All right, so ask around. If you want to do something and you know families in that demographic, before you say we're going to do this, put it on the calendar and start investing money, find families and said, if I had this, would this be something that would interest you and your family? Does that make sense? Don't put $1,000 into an outreach event until you've researched it. You've done your, what my husband would call market research a little. So it's just a safety net. And then when someone's like, why did we spend on this? You also can say, well, I asked 5 people in this demographic and they all said they'd come. So we just went with it. You know, it just protects you a little too, pastors and lady. All right. Let's see who's here. How many clergy? Raise your hand. Laity? Thank you so much, lay people, for coming. Your pastors need you, okay? Your pastors need you. Let me see, rural settings. Raise your hand. All right, urban? Suburban? I'm going to ask you to do something very chancy. I'm going to ask you to move, okay? I would like you to get in rural. How would it would make more sense? Like rural, urban, and suburban. Okay? Because I want you to get together and I want you to talk about what kind of outreach events we might have in your context. Because a lot of the contextual stuff around outreach events does have to do with rural, urban, and suburban. So rural people, if you move over here, urban people here, suburban people over here. So who wants to share first?
We'll do it.
Okay, and you guys were which context?
Suburban.
Okay, and what did you kind of come up the need was?
The need is to provide things for our families to do in this area.
So free quality entertainment.
Right.
For family-friendly quality entertainment.
Right.
Okay.
To get young couples,
Young families is our target, okay. And what did we come up with? Anything fun? Trunk or treat. So that's kind of it's a good outreach event. Keep an eye on how many other churches around you are doing the same event. It's become what I call a church go-to. And so if you already have 5 churches doing the church go-to, you don't want to do it too. So sometimes we need to maybe take that event and twist it a little to make it unique. What can you do to make, if you do decide to do that, you have to do something stand out that the other churches aren't offering. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So you're gonna, if you have 5 other churches that do trunk or treat, you're gonna wanna do trunk or treat and fall festival kind of thing, where you're bringing out the bouncy rides and it's not just a candy thing, it's a full big night. So be very careful. I love copying stuff, but you have to be the first one to copy it. All right, who else wants to share? Yes?
We're urban, and
Yes.
2 of the churches have already said they do a blessing of the animals.
Interesting.
Not talking as much probably a younger group looking for a little older demographic. In J-Town, where I'm at, not far from here, it's not a lot of younger families moving in.
Right.
Mostly people 50s, 60s.
Empty nesters. Yep. Okay.
But one thing I've always wanted to do to tweak that a bit is to do like a pet show, a contest fair.
Okay.
Because they're just absolutely enamored with their pets.
Okay.
Bring them into the event, have food, let them linger a bit, run off and get the photos developed really quick, or print them off on your computers.
Printers, yeah.
And
You should have your printers there at your event.
Something that day right there with a picture of their pet, with some type of little logo or thing in the bottom.
Super easy to do. On the back of those papers, you know those little cheap labels you can buy at the store? You put your church's name, address, website address, and service times. Okay? Nothing should go out of your church without that information on, ever. Okay? Ever. All right. Another thing, we've been working with church web pages. If the first thing the person sees on your church web page is not your address and your service times, you need to work on your home page. It's the first thing they should see. Yes, over here.
We're rural over here.
Okay, great.
About young families and targeting, doing trunk or treat and stuff. But also talked about the need for community, and you had mentioned that. And so this is really more of a question.
Yes.
a lot of people think they're on Facebook, they're in community.
Yeah, they don't know they need community. Remember I talked about the difference between what they acknowledge that they need and what they know they need and what the church thinks they need? They don't know they need community.
How can we transition? How can
I'm
we
going to
use
talk
the
about
tool?
that. I promise I'm going to get there.
Okay.
Can you wait with me? Because I will get with you because that's a really important question. It's a very important thing of what we do. Yes.
We didn't really it wasn't enough time to speak about.
Sure, sure, that's fine. But what did you talk about?
We are doing in Mount Washington, it really followed your lead on following the trend.
Yes.
We started God's Table approximately about 5 years ago, and it's a community meal. And when it was started, it was with a different group of leaders, and their target was more towards the needy.
Right.
And over the past couple years, we have transitioned that to more of a community meal for everyone. And this last God's Table, we served 115 meals.
It's awesome.
And it ranged from, because something we did talk about is we have grandparents and aunts and uncles raising children now.
Yes.
Even non-family members. So this is a good time to get them, to bring their kids. There's sometimes other kids, we have a playground, that kind of thing that they can play. But also, we've incorporated, we have a senior living area.
Right.
That we fill about 4 tables because this is
They
their
wanna
night
get out.
for dinner. It's free. They get dressed up, they come. Sometimes we have activities such as crafts or games, and then we just recently incorporated family time after God's Table. We had a movie night.
Right, and things often grow like that, yeah.
Yes. So we had God's Table from 4 to 6 where we served our meal, and then from 6 to 8 we had a movie. And in October we're doing the God's Table and Trunk or Treat. And like you said, everyone's doing the Trunk or Treat, but we're hoping that if they come and eat with us, they'll want to stay and participate in the Trunk or Treat.
So, just some thoughts for you, and you don't have to, and I don't know your context, I don't know your church, but just some things that I would think about if I were you to help. I would be marketing this as a go and grow event. Does that make sense? Yeah. You come, you eat, you go and you grow. Does that make sense? So I'd be marketing this as come get your meal before you go to soccer practice. Come get your meal before you go to a dance lesson. Come get your meal of something for young families that is going to alleviate the stress within the home, free meal, no dishes kind of thing. That's really going to be your draw, that we're providing a meal for families who mom and dad are working full time. They don't have time to put a meal on the table. They don't have time to sit down as a family and talk. How many of you know that one, right? We're providing the service for you. You can come and grow as a family, and we will provide the food. All you have to do is bring your family.
That's awesome.
Okay, so I would really focus in on that. I would think about maybe looking at your name. God's Table doesn't explain what you do. So I know we all want to put Jesus and crosses and God on everything we do, okay? And you know I love Jesus. Have you gotten the feeling that I love Jesus, okay? But that scares people away sometimes. So we have to really speak about the felt need that we're meeting in the community. Does that make sense? To attract people, especially unchurched people. All right. So you're going to be wanting to market yourself in that way. We're providing the service for families for this thing you can't do for yourself. Does that make sense? All right. Anyone else want to share? Yes.
Over here. Excuse me.
And what, I can't remember how I put you. What setting are you?
Urban.
All right, wonderful.
Over here, we were talking about, one of the main things we were talking about was how the need to reach actual people in our community, and reaching families with young children,
Yes.
seniors.
Yes.
We were talking about how a lot of our churches, it's not the people that live in the
Neighborhood.
It's people that live
It's typical urban problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
How do you get the people in your neighborhood right?
exactly.
Yes.
So one thing we did, actually our church did yesterday, we had a fall festival.
How'd that
First
go?
one it went really great.
Awesome, congratulations. Give them a round of applause. Good job.
We had a lot of people and a lot of people from the community that me personally
Didn't even know they were out there,
I didn't
did
even know. I
you?
hadn't met a lot of people in the community, just me personally. I've been to this church since I was growing up. And
Yeah,
I was little, and some
yeah.
people I never even met. I don't even live in that neighborhood. And it was really successful. We had a big turnout, and we also did a twist on the Fall Festival where we had gospel on the grounds.
Okay.
So we had
Kind of multiple
teams,
events going on
yes. So we had,
simultaneously, yeah.
different churches and different choirs and singers come out and performed
Awesome.
their music and dance. I think there was a dance group too that was there, and that was really successful. It's just kind of adding something to the traditional thing.
And one thing that Brittany brings up is we want these events to be high energy events. We want them to feel on the edge of being out of control. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the world we live in now. If it's not crazy go nuts, people are not happy.
Right.
I mean, every outreach event, like at the end of it, I'm like, I have no idea what happened during the past 3 hours. Don't even ask me, haven't got, even like the egg hunt, I'm like having nightmares about Easter eggs in my church, you know, so yeah. But yeah, anybody else want to share? Great ideas, guys. And I have a list to share with you at the end that I'm withholding for you because I'm afraid if I give you the list now, you'll just get up and leave because you got the good stuff at the beginning. But I do have a list of some kind of what my husband and I call like the tried and true list, that when we enter into consulting with churches and work with them, these are kind of our favorites that we have seen be successful in, depending on your setting and the needs. Okay, so where are we? I don't even know where we are. Okay, so this is what we have to remember. When we have outreach events, we're not just competing with other churches, we're competing for people's time. They can go do anything they want at the same time we're holding our outreach event. So our outreach event needs to be so big, so outrageous, so awesome that they'd rather come to our church or whatever venue you're holding it at and do that over stay home in your pajamas. How many of you know home in your pajamas is a very, very strong motivator? So before you have your outreach event, ask yourself, would I rather go to my church outreach event or stay home with a cup of coffee in my pajamas? If the answer is, to be honest, I'd rather stay home in my pajamas, keep on working on your outreach event. It's not big enough and attractive enough yet. Does that make sense what I'm saying to you? So if you can remember that these outreach events can't just be little things, they have to be enticing. Okay, and I hate using these words in the context of the church because I know the gospel is not enticing in any way. They nailed Jesus to the cross. There's nothing enticing about that. Okay, so it's kind of, I always say at some point in time we do the bait and switch on people where we introduce them to Jesus. But truly, it's very attractional, and I'm not a big theological believer in attractional models and attractional churches. I have a hard time with it personally from a theological perspective. Pastors, raise your hand if you know what I mean. But the reality is that's the reality we're dealing with in churches. Amen? So we got to get on board and find out a way to bait and switch that at some point in time. All right, so now you're like, that's awesome. We have 1,000 great ideas, but now we have no idea how to do any of this. Now I just want to go home and cry because I have no idea how to make this happen. I have no idea how to get 500 people there. I have no idea how to organize my volunteers. John asked me to share with you that like one of the things that John and the church I worked with that John was serving on was these outreach events, because John said you would rather write a dissertation than have an outreach event. I wrote a dissertation. I can't go there with you, brother. I don't like to read and write. I don't know how I got that DR in front of my name, but I don't like to read and write. I'd rather Netflix binge and eat ice cream. But anybody else rather Netflix? Yeah, okay. All right. So you and I can hang, right? Okay, awesome. All right, so where I think some pastors begin to be unsuccessful in these outreach events is in the execution of them. You might have a good idea, but maybe your advertising isn't as strong as it needs to be. So if you have the right idea and poor advertising, you're going to have a great event that's poorly attended, okay? Or organization. Either in the organization of your volunteers and how you manage your volunteer base, and just how many of you know these things can become quite large and quite a lot of details to them and overwhelming very, very quickly, okay? So when you have a poorly organized event and a well-advertised event, you get lots of people coming to an event that people don't want to come back to. Does that make sense? So those are some of the issues that we can have in the execution of the event that really affects whether or not the community is open to coming to the event again. If it's well executed, will they come back next year? Yes, they will. Okay? So I want to talk to you a little about the organization of these outreach events. Organization is key. Pastors, if you don't know where your car keys are, you need to find a lay person who does know where their car keys are. It doesn't have to be your strength. It doesn't have to be your, you know what I mean? We're all different. God made us that way. Thank you, Jesus, for making us all different, right? But it does not mean every pastor that comes out of seminary is really inclined to organize and facilitate outreach events. You do not have to do it all. I recommend you not do it all. I am very organized by nature, okay? I mean, bordering unhealthy, okay? So like, I like everything neat and precise and this comes very intuitive to me. What I'm going to show you comes extremely intuitive to me, but no one ever taught me this in seminary. So if you're a pastor and you're coming out and you're like, I don't know how to do this, don't feel cheated, okay? They didn't teach us how to do this in seminary, okay? No one taught us how to do this. It's just my experience from running literally hundreds of outreach events, small and large, and also my experience with working with other churches and how I can replicate a process for outreach events that applies to every single outreach event and that will organize your outreach event and will prevent volunteer burnout. Do we like that? Okay, because that's another concern, right? We want our volunteers to come back next year too, don't we? It's not just, yeah, we can burn our churches out when we don't plan properly, can't we? Our volunteers become frustrated, they become angry. I've actually had people leave over things that happen at outreach events, okay, leave churches. So this is really, really important. The consequences for not doing this well are not good, okay? So we want to be organized. So the first thing I recommend you do after you've decided on an event, whether you've checked, when we were in Ohio, guess what one of the first things we did before we booked an event was? We checked the Ohio State football game. If it was a home Ohio State football game, we did not have an outreach event. Sounds kind of petty, doesn't it? But guess what? That's reality. I mean, we could almost guarantee, even like when brides would come in to book weddings, that they would not book on the same weekend as a home Ohio State football game because people would not come to their weddings. It's a thing in Ohio. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a healthy thing, but it's a thing, okay? If you've lived in Ohio, you know what I'm talking about. I guess like UK football would be maybe a similar, or UK basketball would be a similar contextual thing here, okay. So like you don't want to have your outreach events on the same weekend as a home UK basketball game if you live in Lexington. Fair enough? All right, because that's where your people are going to be. You can't compete with that. Don't even try, all right? So you need to put together a master schedule. And how you put together a master schedule is you begin with the day of the event. You list out everything that needs to happen the day of the event. When you talked about your thing and you had all different kinds of performers coming to your event, you needed a schedule of who was on stage when. Now, do we die on that schedule? Yes or no? No, we're flexible with it. But if we don't have a plan, guess what's going to happen? Planning to fail? Failing to plan is planning to fail, okay? So we do have to have just kind of a loose schedule so we know when to tell people to show up and when we can tell people they can what? Leave. Volunteering in outreach events should not be a life sentence like teaching Sunday school, okay? It's not a life sentence. It's a temporary volunteer commitment. So you begin with the event, the day of the event, you write out the schedule of the event. For example, with the egg hunt, you're like, at this time, the 0 to 3s are gonna hunt eggs. And from this time, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? You start with the day of the event. And then after you have all of the things for the day of the event, you work forward and you work backwards. Does that make sense? So you have to, and this is the thing with outreach events, you probably need to start 3 months ahead of time. You need at least a 3-month lead for a decent outreach event. It can be easy peasy outreach event, you still need 3 months because you need to get your advertising out 3 weeks ahead of time, okay? And so to do the advertising, you need someone to, right, put that advertising together. You might have some graphic design people involved, some advertising people involved. You're gonna want, okay, so we have to start early. And did you all get the handouts? You all get the handouts? Yeah, get your handouts. You have a sample, do they have the sample master schedule, John, that I emailed? Do you have a sample master schedule there? Oh, it's all job descriptions. John is going to send out these PowerPoints, and with that, I will send out a sample master schedule for an egg hunt. Is that fair, John? Because I'm sorry, you didn't get that email from us that had all this stuff attached to it, so my apologies. So let's talk about, you begin 3 months ahead of time for large events. And you're going to say, this is what we're going to do 3 months out, this is what we're going to do 2 months out, this is going to do 1 month out, and then it's weekly. 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week. I usually go out like 2 days before the event, the day before the event, then you have the event schedule, and then the things that need to happen after the event. Because after you have an event, how many of you know it ain't over? Okay? That's just the beginning, right? What good does it do if you have 1,000 people in your church ground and you don't follow up with any of them? So we're going to talk about follow-up and how we do follow-up later. Okay? So you're going to look, and these are some things you should consider, and I should have put a PowerPoint in there. Prayer. This is a tactical thing. It's kind of corporate and cold. It's still a church. We still believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen? We still believe in the power of prayer. These things are nothing without our spiritual strength behind it. Prayer teams. What do you want the prayer teams to do? You need to have them praying over the event. You need to have them praying over the venue where the event is going to happen. Because if you don't think that Satan wants to get in there and mess with that, you are super naive. Satan does not want 3,000 people considering going to church. And if you don't think he's going to mess with it, and the devil is in the what? Details. Okay? So the prayer team begins, I think, like a month out, and they begin praying for the event. You go to that prayer team, any need you have, right? We don't have enough volunteers. We need more candy for the egg hunt. We need fill in the blank. Our registration's lower. We don't know that this advertising. You pray. Unless you don't believe in prayer, and then you don't need an outreach event. Okay? About a week to 3 weeks ahead, pray the venue. Have them walk over the grounds, praying for all the details of the event, the people who are going to be at this event. Okay? I so believe in the power of prayer. I can't even emphasize how important that is to me in these outreach events. Because honestly, as a pastor, I'm not brave enough to put out that much money, that much time, and ask that much of my congregation if it's not covered in prayer. Because folks, let's put it, our keisters are on the line if this thing doesn't work out, isn't it? You bet I want this thing prayed over. Okay? What happens to that prayer team as they're praying for that event?
They're changed.
They're changed. How many of you are changed through prayer? And they have friends in the church. Okay? I believe so much in the power of prayer. My church was going through a process that was like some major change. I'm talking major change. I'm talking as a result of this change process we went through, remodeled our entire building with the exception of the sanctuary. Every square inch of our 30,000 square foot facility. Change, okay? But I said, we are doing this for the community. We are going to walk every street in Wapakoneta, Ohio. Took my church, and Wapakoneta is not huge, but took them, how long do you think it took them? 2.5 weeks. They walked literally every street in Wapakoneta, Ohio. It takes the focus from here to where? There, when we pray. And that's where we want people's heads when those people come on our grounds, right? Because I'm going to tell you, you invite the public into your facility, into your church, into your grounds, janky stuff is going to happen. I'm just warning you. It's not going to be all pretty with a little bow on top. Weird stuff is going to happen. We need to be prepared to respond to that in a Christian way, where we're there for the people. All right, so we're going to 4 months out, 3 months out. These are the important things that have to be done. If you are partnering with a big box store, I talked about Walmart providing all the candy for that egg hunt. They have paperwork that needs to be filed. You need to submit your umbrella paperwork from the branch office in Nashville saying you're incorporated with the United Methodist Church and showing your 501c3 status. You don't just go into Walmart and ask for free candy and you roll out with the, whole basket of free candy, There's paperwork to be done, and you need to start that stuff early. Walmart is most generous, I find, if you get to them 3 months ahead of time. If you get to them last minute, they're just going to turn you away. Okay, I can promise you that, all right? So 3 months out, any kind of partnering that you want to establish, especially with your big box stores, that paperwork has to be filed 3 months out, all right? 3 months out, you need to identify your chair and your sub chairs, and we're going to talk about sub chairs later, because I'm going to talk to you about how to structurally set up your volunteer pool so you're not pulling your hair out trying to decide what the signature colors of your outreach event are going to be. Raise your hand if you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's see, since you don't have that information, I'm trying to think what else is on there. Advertising. At the 3 month point, we want to start working on our advertising. We want to start deciding what type of advertising we want to do. And let me see, do I have an advertising thing or should I go through it now? No, I'm going to address advertising later, but graphic designers are usually involved and they're not as cheap as you think they are, so stop being cheap, churches, okay? A huge problem when churches are cheap, okay? And so that stuff, working with anyone from the outside, needs to begin 3 months out, okay? I'm trying to think. So 3 months out, you have to have all your, am I coming through? Can you hear me? I feel like I'm yelling. 3 months out, you have to have all your key people, and they meet for the first time 3 months out, okay? Make sure everyone understands to make some pivotal decisions about the event. What exactly do we need? How many volunteers are we going to need? Those kinds of decisions need to be made, kind of that 3 month decision. What is this event? What's it going to look like, right? What kind of things do we want available? So that happens, that 3 month out meeting happens. Now listen, the pastor, the chairperson, and the co-chairs, they are the only people invited to that meeting. Studies show that after 10 people, every person you add to the meeting, or for every person in a meeting, it loses 10% effectiveness for every person you add to that meeting. Raise your hand if you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're keeping it small at the beginning so you can be agile with your decisions. Does that make sense? The whole world doesn't get to ring in at the beginning. Does that make sense what I'm saying? How many of you know the whole world wants to ring in at the beginning, okay? But it's small. You're keeping it small. When you're making core decisions, you want to keep that group small, okay? All right, that's crucial. My last church I served would hold an outdoor concert, and I know that doesn't sound impressive, but 3,000 to 5,000 people, newsboys, Audio Adrenaline, Sidewalk Prophets. You know any of these people? Okay, Big Daddy Weave, big names we'd bring in. Okay, we had to start that a year ahead of time because those contracts with those artists and their labels, need to be signed a year out to get on their touring schedule. So again, the bigger the event, the further out you need to begin planning. How many of you think holding an outdoor concert with a big name like that, it takes a year to do. It really does. Concert season never stopped. We would do one concert and we would start working on the next one immediately. That was our next meeting. It was our debriefing meeting and the starting of the next concert, okay? So you have to work forward and backwards. So about 3 months out, I'm trying to think if there's anything urgent at the 3 months. So you have the sub chairs. I'm trying to think about, I'm going to move on, and John will send you that master schedule so you can see it for yourself. And again, it's my fault. It's not John's fault. I take full culpability. But I think when you see it in front of you, you're really happy. So, so your schedule can include, there's a helpful slide, meeting dates, okay? You will never, ever, 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 ever have a meeting with all your volunteers, ever. Ever. Okay? And I'm going to tell you why in a minute. How many of you like that? Less meetings, more doing. Okay, this is what yes. You like that? Okay, awesome. I think it's time the church stop talking about doing ministry and get off their keisters and do ministry, okay? I don't want my people sitting in meetings. I want them doing ministry. So I try and keep this process as streamlined. You don't need to go to a meeting to show up for 2 hours to put kids in a bouncy castle. Do you know what I'm saying to you? That's why people don't volunteer. Because they're like, all I'm going to do is put kids in a bouncy castle. I don't want to have to go to 6 hours of meetings about stuff that has nothing to do with putting kids in a bouncy castle. But that's what we do to people, isn't it? So we're only meeting with people who it's essential to meet with. Purchase dates. Know how long it takes to get things. If I waited last minute to get eggs for the egg hunt, we're in trouble because it takes about 2 weeks to stuff those 10,000 eggs we're going to stuff and distribute. How long do you think it takes my church? It took my church 2 weeks to stuff 10,000 eggs. Why? Why? Because I like to have fun. Can anybody tell I'm a fun girl? Anybody tell that? I'm a fun gal? So this community was very competitive. How many of you are competitive people or have competitive people in your church? My church was super competitive, so I'm like, this class over here, I'm pitting you against this Sunday school class over here, and I want to see who can stuff the most eggs this week. People were taking eggs like they were gold to stuff them. Okay, we had a big ministry for middle school kids called the 46ers, and they would have like Easter egg stuffing races where they'd run down, stuff the egg, run back, take the next person. Just make it fun. Don't be like, oh my gosh, we have 10,000 eggs, please take some, okay? It can be fun. You're allowed to have fun in church. Once in a while I'd walk in and people would be laughing. They'd be like, oh, Pastor, I'm so sorry. I'm like, that's right, we're in church. There will be no joy. It's okay to have fun, all right? Volunteer blitz, about 4 weeks out, and 3 weeks out, and 2 weeks out, you're going to want a handout in your bulletin, and that handout is also in the things I'm going to forward you, saying these are the volunteers we need, and you're going to list the different positions that you need filled. We need people with games. We need people to help with food. We need people to help with setup. We need people to help with takedown. On that handout, when you list all those things, you're going to put in the bulletin what time they need to show up and what time they're allowed to leave. How many of you think you might get volunteers if they know what's exactly being expected of them? People don't volunteer because they're like, I don't want to make a commitment that big, and I don't know what the commitment's going to be. So we're outlining the time commitment up front. Do you have to go in any meetings? What are we making clear? Are you going to have to go to a meeting to do this? No. No meetings. Just show up the day of the event from noon to 2. That's all we want from you. Okay? You're going to put the time commitment, and then the person just checks that off in their bulletin and puts it into the offering plate when it comes around. Does that make sense? All right. These are all hands on deck events. Yes, do you agree? Make sure you have an event. I will pray for this event. Make sure you have a thing. I will donate to this event, because not everybody can be available the day of the event. So make sure you also have things that the people can do outside of the event. Okay, I'll help with follow-up. I'll help hang posters for the event. Those are all things that you don't have to be outside in the hot sun if you don't like the hot sun, right? So again, make sure there's something on that sheet that everyone can participate in. This is what I'm going to say to you. Why am I emphasizing this all hands on deck thing? We want our folks in the pews to be invested in this as much as we are. If they're not invested in it, are they going to invite people to it? No. Are they going to want it to do well? No. Okay, let's face it, there's some pew haters out there in our pews, aren't there? Okay. Who are just like, I don't know why we got to do this, right? But all of a sudden, if you've invested in it some way, you're on Team First Church. Yeah. Does that make sense what I'm saying to you? So you have to constantly drill, this is, everybody's participating in this. And my people would hate it. They would see me come and I'd be like, have you signed up yet for the egg hunt? Okay. They were like running out the door. No, just kidding. But I'd see people who I knew were key in the church, who I knew the whole congregation would be looking toward, and gently saying to them in a loving way, people look at you, and they're going to follow what you do. So if you've done nothing else other than put a bag of candy in the bin, that's fine, but you are going to contribute. Okay? Lovingly, of course. Right, so there's a volunteer blitz where you stand up every Sunday. 3 Sundays in a row, you're going to stand up and you're going to say, we are so excited about this outreach event. And these are the way you can be a part of it. And I do expect everyone to participate in it. You can say that to them. Are they going to listen to you necessarily? No. But some people will. This is the thing, pastors. We aren't asking people to do anything horrible. We're asking them to find and live into their callings. So we need to switch how we think about volunteers. I'm not burdening someone. I'm empowering them to find their meaning in life. Okay? Never apologize for helping someone find their call. Never. Okay? So you don't need to apologize for asking for volunteers, ever. Right? So there's going to be 3 weeks. I think maybe 5, 4, and depending on how big the thing is, like 4, 3, and 2 weeks out in church on Sunday. Does that make sense? Lining up your volunteers, saying, these are your opportunities, check it, put it in the tray. Prayer blitz and advertising. So 3 weeks ahead of time of the event. A month is too far out. People aren't thinking a month ahead. Raise your hand if you know you don't know what you're doing a month from now. Just saying, some of us don't know, right? And so a month's too soon. 3 weeks is the big push. All the posters go out in the community. Panera's, community bulletin boards, YMCA's, raise your hand if you know, the grocery stores and their bulletin boards. Anywhere that will let you hang a poster, hang a poster. And then inside your bulletin, you will have, and I'm getting into the advertising section, a quarter sheet handout. And they go in the bulletin. And alongside the volunteer blitz, let's see, 3, 2, and 1 week out, these go in your bulletin, okay? And you tell these people, if I find these in your purse, in your wallet, I'm coming after you. These are not for you. These are to do what? Invite a friend, family, or coworker to. The number one way people find their way into your congregation is through personal invitation. That still holds true today. Okay, those statistics haven't changed. That particular statistic, and how many of you know all the statistics have changed? But that one remains the same. The number one way people find a church is not through their website, not even through an outreach event. It's through personal invitation. Maybe personal invitation to an outreach event, right? But by personal invitation, okay? So, those weeks, and I would hammer every week, these are not for you, they're to invite. And people will invite. I know you're afraid people won't invite, but if you're putting an awesome event together, people will invite, okay? All right, so 3 weeks ahead of time, my church, how many of you have churches on a great corner? Traffic, yeah, that's where you put one of those giant long banners out. You know, date, you don't even date, just if you have that event the third weekend of March every year, or the weekend before Easter, Sunday before Easter, that's all you put on that banner. The Sunday before Easter, or the Saturday before Easter, egg hunt this time. It goes out in front of your church. You can use that sucker again next year. There's no date on it. Okay, so try to think creatively about your advertising that you're going to use over and over and over again. Some churches use yard signs. The people in their churches take yard sign homes that say third week of March, egg hunt, such and such a venue. And then 3 weeks out, you put those out. They can put those in their front yards. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Yes.
An advertisement for the Kentucky Annual Conference Communications Division. They can do a lot of these resources for us.
Awesome.
Awesome. Signs and
awesome. Great. Thank you for that resource, because I think churches don't know where to begin. So awesome. Thank you so much.
they do need some advance notice, like 3 months. So
Yes. So that makes sense. Well, I'm like on the 3-month thing, right?
I want to repeat it so it's on.
Yes. Can you say that again louder into my microphones without being inappropriate?
Got a big mouth.
Okay.
the Kentucky Annual Conference Communications Division can do a lot of the advertising things that she's been talking about, banners, signs, posters. They can print those for you not at no cost, but at pretty low cost. And as long as you give them like 2 or 3 months notice, they can get it to you for your event, and it'll be a lot less expensive than an outside company would be.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
They do wonderful work.
Yeah. And like, how many of you have last minute communities? How many of you know that? Yeah. You just wait the week before, put the sign out, this Saturday, okay? They're just yard signs. They're not super expensive, and if you don't put a date on them, you can use them every year if this is an event you plan on holding again. Is what I'm saying making sense? I know you're on a budget. I get that, okay? All right. Any questions about any of this stuff? Because I kind of just went through it like a crazy lady. All right. Yes.
That was interesting for us for our fall festival. We had vendors.
Yes.
So one of the vendors had her own webpage. And she said, is it okay if I advertise this fall festival on my webpage? And so we were like, yeah. She wanted to know all the entertainers that would come.
Yes.
She wanted to know all the vendors that would come. She wanted information for the church. She wanted to know what our vision statement was.
Yes.
She wanted to know what this
What's it about?
festival and Gospel on the Grounds was about. And I mean, it was beautiful.
Good.
And she's not a member of any church.
Well, there you go.
I took her, what, maybe about 3 hours, and she had that thing fully loaded. We were like, what? So when she came, I said, oh, I need to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and vendors are really good, a really good resource for advertising.
Yes.
Because if you have vendors coming out, they have fans. If you have performers coming out, that's another thing we did with our fall festivals. We had performers and they put it out on their page too, or told their people, and they were like, oh, yeah, we'll put it out, and then that's, that helps bring more people in.
For those, and I'll get to this because we're going to talk about social media a little later. Okay?
Do you have a percentage or principle that when you work with churches on how much of their budget should be oriented toward evangelism outreach?
I don't know about percentage. I recommend that churches hold a big outreach event quarterly. So you can do the math from there. And your outreach event should be appropriately sized to your church. So this church here that I'm standing in, you better have a kick-in outreach event. Okay? Smaller church, still awesome, but not the same thing the community expects from a church's size, okay? So, does that answer your question?
That helps.
For a year.
To hear you say 4 times a year gives a different.
Because we're trying for what? 1,000 what? Touches. Okay? All right. Pastors, you are not a one-man show. If this is news to you, we can talk offline. Let's face it. I don't know about you, but I really like control. I don't like the feeling like I'm not steering the ship. How many of you pastors know exactly what I'm talking about? We have to let go a little and let our lay people do things. They're going to make decisions in 100 years we would never make. And sometimes they're the best decisions ever. Let your volunteers do their thing. They will learn. Does that make sense? They will learn. I'm not saying let them run off the edge of a cliff, okay? That's not at all what I'm suggesting. But I have had to learn the hard way as a clergy person that when I hold things too tight, I kill them. Because I just like it, just a little tight around their little necks, okay? So if you're like me and you've got a little bit of a control freak thing going on, sometimes I would just not go to these meetings. Okay? Do you know what I'm saying to you? All right, so just be careful. So this is what it will look like. You'll have a chairperson, and the chairperson and pastor should be 2 people who can partner together well. That's not brain surgery, is it? All right? And then, I'm sorry this is small, you have sub-chairs. So this is just showing a sub-chair. There's one for food, there's one for advertising, there's one for games, there's one for hospitality, there's one for follow-up, okay? So these, just decide with your event what kind of sub-chairs you need, okay? Different events are going to need different what? Sub-chairs. It's all contextual, okay? So you're going to kind of assign each sub-chair a section of the event that they're responsible for, okay? This is the group that's going to meet regularly. Not everyone involved, but just those sub-chairs and the chair and perhaps the pastor, because we all know we're busy and we can't get to every meeting all the time because sad things happen in the world and we need to be other places sometimes, okay? This is your core group of volunteers. These are your decision makers, okay? These are the people who are making key and critical decisions about what is happening at these events and what's not going to happen at these events. Pastors, read your minutes from these meetings, okay? These are the people that are going to be meeting regularly. Remember those people get those things, those sheets, right? The people who signed up to do food, who gets those volunteer sheets? Who gets them? The food sub-chair. People who volunteer for games, guess who gets those sheets? The food sub-chair. Pastor, do you need to call each one of those people personally? No. Who does it? The sub-chairs. Yeah. How many of you here, or someone else? No, you! How many of you are liking this already? No one teaches us in seminary how to organize these things. So we think we have to do it ourselves, and we don't. I mean, if you knew this, I'm sorry if I'm boring you to death. You're like, duh, okay? If you already knew this, I'm sorry. But there are people out there who don't know they should be organizing these events this way, and they're drowning underneath a pile of details and tasks, okay? And then these volunteers are contacted by who? The sub-chairs, all right? Do they ever have to meet? Maybe. The sub-chair is free, if they feel it necessary, to meet with their volunteers, but I discourage it. It's sometimes necessary. Does that make sense? Some of these things are like when we had concerts and when we were working with the hospitality with the artists, they would always meet because the artists always had some strange kind of request that needed to be met about, like how are we going to do this or whatever. Or there's some training that needs to take place. We usually did some type of pre-training, half an hour pre-training with our hospitality people because we felt like they were not equipped to do their jobs. They needed some training. So in those cases, but keep it short, half hour. Does that make sense? All right. So generally speaking, these teams should not have to meet. And they don't have to meet because they all have job descriptions. Job descriptions take the guesswork out of what is being expected of you and what you're going to be doing the day of the event. Now, how many of you think this is kind of stupid? I signed up for games, I'm going to do something with games, it's good. But how many of you know people want to know what they're doing and what's being expected of them? Okay? So you have with you some job descriptions. Those did get to you because that went on the first email blitz I did to you. And it's just a job description, and in there are things like what they are, what they signed up to do, their title. So you want job descriptions for the sub-chairs. How many of you that makes sense? So they know exactly what they're being expected to do. And then each volunteer position gets a short little job description. It doesn't have to be long. Some of them only 3-4 lines long, right? But it outlines exactly, let's see what it's in it. What's expected of them, be as specific as possible. The time commitment that that person is signing up for. And if they're expected to attend anything else. So again, clarity. Everybody's on the same page. You do not want someone to show up at your event and be like, oh, I didn't know that that was what I had to do, okay? If they're expected to handle or manage money or a budget. Do I have to explain this or do you get it? Okay. Yeah. If they're expected to lead other people, that's really important. Some people don't want to lead, and that's okay. Not everybody has to lead other people. If they're expected to do any administrative tasks, all right, and who they report to, and AKA, if I can't make it the day of the event, who do I call to tell I can't come? You have no idea how many people, what happens if everybody reports to the chairperson the day of the event? Yes, there's a line of people. And that happens anyway, even with sub-chairs, right? So now imagine every volunteer in your event thinks that every question they have to have has to go to that chairperson. I will tell you, you will not have the same chairperson next year. Okay? So if people know, if I have a question, I don't necessarily go to pastor all the time. I go to that sub-chair. That alleviates a lot off of the chairperson and the pastor's plate. And half the time, I have noticed when people come to me about something like that, I'm just going to say, I don't know anything about the food. You have to talk to the person who's in charge of the food. So I'm just redirecting that person to that other sub-chair anyway, okay? But when you write it out and say this is who you report to, this is their email address, this is their phone number, the confusion is suddenly gone. How many of you know there's a lot of have done these outreach events and know confusion is everywhere? This is eliminating or helping to eliminate some of the confusion, okay? We want everything to be like glass. Okay, smooth as glass. So that's how you organize these events. It's very, I hate hierarchical things, but it's kind of hierarchical. That's okay. But it works. Do you trust me? How many of you get this is a lot of administrative work up front, getting these job descriptions stuff together. But once you have them together, guess what you can do for the same event next year? Use the same things, tweak them if you need to. Okay, it's upfront work that will make the event the day. John, do you want to say anything about this? Because I taught you this process. And what was it like for you, like to go through this process and for the first time and see how it goes?
So for me, when I did this up front, there was a lot of work. And Dr. Kim kind of sat down with me and showed me, walked me through writing all of those job descriptions out. And, you know, it was like a lot of brainstorming and things like that. And I was like, well, what exactly do they need to do? Who would they report to? What do they need? What's their budget? There was a lot of that I had to think through because I chaired my own first event. And there's a story to that as well. But there was a lot ahead of time that I had to do. However, what I found was once I got those job descriptions out to the sub-chairs and let them do their thing, oh my gosh, it was easy. I didn't have to worry about anything. What I had to do was
just check in with the sub-chairs, right?
I checked in with the sub-chairs. I didn't have to stress or worry over all of the details anymore because it was all taken care of. And my job at that point was cheerleader on Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And getting people involved and laying out the expectation about, you know what, I'm kicking you into ministry here, and this is going to be great. It's going to be fun, and I will tell you, it's true. I was terrified to do an event because I just didn't know how to do it. My mind does not work that way at all. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, I was like, oh yeah, I could do this again. It's no problem.
Because the process is applicable to anything you want to do.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. Any questions about organization, job descriptions? And again, some of you are like, this is stupid. Why would I do this? Try it once. Do it once and experience the difference. Okay? You will not go back to events without job descriptions.
I do have a question.
Yes.
And I apologize.
No.
Not necessarily about
It's okay.
organizations, but when you talk about partnering up, I'm real intrigued with this partnering up with somebody else in your community. But we do go by safe sanctuary.
Yes.
So if you're partnering with somebody else, how do you incorporate safe sanctuaries with that group? Do they have to
I think it depends on the event. If it's a public event like an egg hunt where everyone's out in public and no one is working one-on-one exclusively with the kids are still supervised by the parents, there's no need to do background checks because it's public. Okay. But if you're doing something like an outreach where you're like a VBS kind of thing, those criminal background checks need to be done. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, and the people can receive just a copy of your policy, sign a statement saying that they've read it and they've agreed to the safe sanctuary policies. Does that make sense? Doesn't have to be a big drawn out thing. You give them the policies, they sign something saying they agree to the policy and they understand it. Legally, that's what you need to do to keep yourself safe.
Thank you.
If there's a lawyer in the house and I just said the wrong thing, please correct me. But my best friend is a lawyer, so he's like my free legal dude, Brian. So, all right. And by the way, if you doubt my knowledge of safe sanctuaries, I chaired safe sanctuaries for West Ohio a couple years ago when we rewrote our entire safe sanctuary policy for every church in West Ohio. So I do know my way around safe sanctuaries. All right, let's talk about advertising. Color. How many of you see in black and white? I mean, you're colorblind, that's okay, but most people, we live in a what? What age do we live in? We live in a color age. The only people still advertising in black and white are churches and the YMCA. You're laughing because you know it's true. Okay? Even when your kids come home from school with flyers, they're in what? Color. The public schools are doing it in color. Come on, guys. There's no reason we can't do, right? Color, color, color. People are not going to come to your event if they look at it and it's cheap. It looks cheap. I'm not saying the event is cheap. You're putting all this money into an event to make it big and awesome. Do not communicate to the community that it's cheap by advertising in black and white. Don't do it. Am I wrong, communication guy from the conference? Okay. I'm not wrong, huh? You must do it in color. I do recommend that you get it professionally produced. There's a huge amount of difference in the vibrancy of the color. To have it produced professionally, it's not expensive. Color is 5 cents a sheet for 8.5 by 11. You cut that into quarters, you have 4 handouts. It's almost 1 cent per handout that you're going to put in your church bulletin. Think about this. Okay? It's not as expensive as you think it is. I promise you. At my church when we did the egg hunts and stuff, with the exception of like the banners and the yard signs, like for posters and handouts and stuff like that, easily maybe $50 in printing cost. Okay? We're not talking about bankrolling, someone's college education here. All right? It's color. How many of you, that's a mind shift for you? Your church has never advertised in color before. Okay. People expect color. They're not going to come because black and white says, you're not important enough to spend, what would the cost difference be? Like 25% more, 30% more to have it done in color. The cost of color has come down. Now, for those of you who have been in ministry for a long time like me, color used to be super expensive. That's why we didn't do it. But it's not anymore. So color. Posters go out a month ahead of time. I recommend a 11 by 17, is that what it is? Size poster. Again, 11 by 17 reads expensive to the community. Because what's cheap, but what? 8.5 by 11. So you want to go a little bigger than the 8.5 by 11. I recommend 11 by 17. It's great graphically to do different graphic stuff with that sizes.
But it's not that expensive.
It's not that expensive. How much are we talking, John, like per sheet?
Oh gosh, I think it was
35 cents or something like that?
Something like that. It wasn't a lot.
Per poster. You're probably only going to hang, 20, 30 posters? Maybe, if you're lucky, around the community. All right. And make sure that person who's hanging those posters or those people who hang those posters know where people in your community hang out. Does that make sense? Be selective about who you get to hang up those posters. There are people in your faith community who hang out at all the places that all the other people in community hang out. We used to have a woman in our church, and she didn't have a whole lot, and so she asked for gas money. So we would give her a gas card, and she would hang the posters in the community. It was a win-win. Okay? So think about it. Who in your community knows? And they were everywhere. Like, I would go out in the community and I'd be like, oh, there's one there, there's one there. It was awesome. Imagine what kind of a boost that is for your faith community to see that. How many of you think that builds confidence in your community? You bet it does. And in addition to that person that would put them out, I would put some out in like the gathering area of the church and say, if there's a place that you know of, grab one and hang it up. Okay, so they were also available to the community, the faith community in general, but I did have one key go-to person, or I had, and depending on the church, 1 or 2 go-to people who I knew were a little social. You know what I mean? And they knew where the cool kids were hanging out. All right. Handouts go in those bulletin 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. We talked about those. If you find them in the pews, let me tell you, the first Sunday I did this at a new church, I found all these things in the pew. I gathered them all, and guess what they saw next Sunday? I said, at least pretend that you're doing it. Lie to me. Love me enough to lie to me. Okay? How many of you know sometimes we love people enough to lie to them, right? Love me enough to lie to me. Local cable. How many of you have local cable places that will advertise your event? Free events. Local cable. Okay. Handouts I want to talk about. How many of you have preschools in your churches? Those go, daycare in your building. Anything that happens in your building, guess what those people get? Handouts. How many of you have people in your buildings for stuff? Who do you have in your building?
We have a preschool.
Yeah.
Preschool.
Those flyers go in the preschool bins. We get permission first, but those flyers go in the preschool bins. How many of you have like AA that meets at your church? Yeah. It's not hard to show up at the meeting and be like, hey, we're having this event. I wanted to invite your family, and just hand them up and leave. It takes 5 minutes. Okay? You have community people in your building. They're already familiar. They're the ones who are most likely to come back there because they're comfortable there. Okay? So especially if you're having it on premise, that's low-hanging fruit. We used to call that low-hanging fruit at my church. That's low-hanging fruit. Okay? Yard signs, we talked about those. Do not put dates on them. Make sure you're consistent. The Saturday before Easter, or the 2 weeks before Christmas, or whatever, however you're going to position that, because we're going to want to use those yard signs and those church banners. I close clicker. Again, love the banners, the big old banners. How big are those? I can't even, the big long ones. How many of you know they're like 4 by 8 banners? 8 by 3 banners. Okay, so those are great. When Walmart partnered with us for the egg hunt, Walmart asked for a banner. Now, how many of you in Walmart done ask churches for nothing? Okay? And again, it's just a matter of thinking differently. It's not hard. Nothing individually that I'm telling you is hard today, is it? It's just no one told you this stuff, right? And I love being at the tactical level. And John knows, like John, how many of you know your DS is an amazing theologian? He's got like an incredible brain. Like he would talk theology and be like, I don't know about that, but in the real world, this is what that looks like. So we really stretch and challenge each other. We have a fun relationship. All right. When you advertise, keep it simple. I look at advertisements and there's so many words on it that I just don't want to read it. I'm lazy. Event, date and time, what it is. Any key sponsorships that are being required of you to put on there, like the deal with the Walmart was that we would say that, you know, we got they gave us permission to use your logo. Make sure you have permission before you do anything like that. They will sue you. And, you know, so just the key information. You want to emphasize that it is what? Free. Especially if the appeal of your event is that it's free entertainment for young families. If they don't know it's free, they ain't coming. Free. 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 There are 3 words in advertising that are key words. Win, free, and sex. We don't gamble, and I don't think sex is appropriate for a church outreach event. So all we have left to us is what? Free. That's actual scientific research. I did not come up with that. That's marketing research. All right. Social media. How many of you are on social media? How many of you hate social media and wish it would die a long and painful death? I get both sides. Churches must be on social media. You don't have a choice. You don't. Who remembers like 7 years ago you had to have a website? Your church didn't have a website. If you didn't have a website, you were dead in the water. You had to have a website. Social media is the new website, okay? Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Your church needs a hashtag, okay? How many of you, I've lost you already? Okay. What else is there out there that I recommend churches get on? Those are the main ones that aren't too weird. I don't like Snapchat. I'm not a big Snapchat fan. But those are the ones, and we're probably showing our age a little. Because there are new social media venues out there that my husband and I are like, whoa, that is, yeah, not in what we want to use social media for. So those are the ones that we kind of encourage churches to have accounts for. Social media is a tool. It's just like money. We can use it for good or we can use it for evil. So just try and keep that in context for those of you who are like, I hate social media. I've seen like horrible things on social media. I've seen people behave poorly on social media, right? Just like life. Okay. But churches don't have a choice anymore. You must be on social media. The social media blitzes happen a month out, 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 days, and then the day before. You can buy advertising on Facebook. Okay, were you aware you could buy advertising on Facebook? I think it's like $0.25 a pop, $0.25 a thing. They eat through those things like candy. I mean, people, if you think it doesn't work, try it. You will be amazed. And then we've also had some success with Spotify advertisements. Okay, who knows what Spotify is? Okay, it's free music that people listen to, and you can buy advertisements on Spotify. And it depends on how geographically you're located, but you can specify certain demographics in Spotify. So we really like the fact that you can, in Facebook too, you can say, I only want this demographic, I only want people who look at these kinds of things. And so you can really get specific, so you make sure you're advertising to those people who your event is trying to reach, which is one reason why my husband and I really encourage you to identify an audience for your outreach event, is because it helps you then, when it comes to the advertising stage, know how to advertise and what venues to use to advertise, okay? So we really like Spotify. If you can get Spotify has some unusual demographic things or geography things. So you have to be careful with Spotify because of the geography, the way Spotify breaks up geography. Am I making sense? But if that geography demographic works for you, we really like Spotify advertisements. And people will say to other people who are associated with that church, I heard your church on Spotify. People will say things like that to you. Facebook is also a great way to advertise through social media that you can pay for. But you can also use social media for free. The more people in your church who will share your thing, the better. I mean, and another thing about Facebook is you can send out an invite, and it gives you, I'm not going to say it gives you an accurate count, but it does kind of help you and your chair build the excitement as you see, ooh, 200 people have already accepted an invitation to this event. And it's not an accurate count. Don't go by that count, ever. Never, ever, ever use your Facebook invite count to kind of estimate how many hot dogs you need. But it is exciting, as like when your chair comes into your sub-chair meeting and says, we already have 200 people who are coming on Facebook, okay? So it is a way to motivate your folks and help them get their mind wrapped around that this is big. You get to be part of something big. Okay? Emphasize free, I can't say that enough. Free, 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 free. And ironically, my husband and I are working on the first outreach event that people will be charged to participate in, and we're going to talk about that when I get to the slides before lunch, the last slides before lunch. All right, social media, your people have to invite, period. And I went over that briefly already. All right, here is the bread and butter of why we are doing what we are doing. You can do all the advertising in the world, you can do all the organization in the world, and you can have picked all the right events, but it is worth nothing unless you follow up with those people. Anybody here in sales? Okay, what would happen if you got 2,000 leads? Do you know what I'm talking about? Leads? Leads are like hints that someone might be interested in your project. What would happen to you and your boss if you got 2,000 leads and you never followed up on a single one of them, Andrew?
I have to find another job.
He would definitely be looking for another job, Aaron. Now unemployed. Come work for me. It'll be cool. Yeah. But for whatever reason, churches have outreach events. Hundreds of people show up. It's awesome. And we don't follow up with a single one of them. Big, 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 big mistake. How many of you know what I mean? We have the event. We say it was a success. We wash our hands of the people who came. Crazy. First date. Remember the first date analogy? We want to ask them out on a what? Second date. Okay, here's the thing, and you guys are going to groan when I say this. When you have an outreach event, you need another event to invite people to. Your work has just begun when you have these outreach events. What you're doing is you're inviting them a step closer to the community. So, you need at least one event after. I prefer 3. Large churches, you need to have a 1, 2, 3. Small churches, 1, 2 is fine. But we would have our concert on a Saturday. Okay? How many of you think people or volunteers are tired after that? And then that next Monday, our Vacation Bible School would start. I'm not trying to burn anyone out, but that was our big outreach event. We did quarterly ones, but that was the big one. That was the one everyone in the community knew our church for. Okay? Why do you do the Easter egg hunt? Because what big outreach event are you going to invite them to the next week? What is it? Easter worship service. Okay? You do something at Christmas, you invite them to Christmas Eve service. You really want to utilize times when your community, your larger community, is open to spirituality. And Christmas and Easter are 2 of those times. Our communities are open to spiritual things and being invited to a spiritual experience and going to a church when they normally would not. Okay? So we really want to hit, it's really an opportunity for the church that we miss oftentimes. If you're not doing something pre-Christmas and pre-Easter, I'd really ask you to consider that and look and see if there is some way that there is something you can do to the community to offer them something and remind them that your church is here. Okay? Let's see, follow up. So, we don't gamble, that's cool. But I always have a door prize that people can sign up to win. It has to be a nice door prize. At the concert, we gave out Kindle Fires. How many of you might give me your, hey, how much, who knows how much a Kindle Fire cost? Google it. What is the cheapest, how much is the cheapest? They're not expensive. They're like maybe, the cheapest one with the smallest screen is probably like $60, $70. But how many of you know people do not want to give you their phone number and they don't want to give you their email? They don't want to be what? Spammed. They want to be spammed. Who likes spam? Who gets super excited when you see the advertisements for Keto's weight loss diet? I mean, raise your hand. We all hate it, okay? So I understand where people are coming from. But some things I like for kids are bicycles, especially if you're in a community that has need. Kids don't have bikes, okay? If every kid in your neighborhood has a bike, don't raffle off a bike, for goodness sake, okay? But at the concert, we did Kindle Fires. We find that like gift baskets, kids' gift baskets with fun kids stuff in, do really, really well. We get good turnout for that, okay? But you know your community, like even like family movie night baskets with like movie passes and movie gift certificates, popcorn, you know, the one year we did like kids game baskets with jump ropes and balls and things like that in it, you know, just fun stuff that people are going to be like, I will let you have my phone number and email. We don't ask for addresses anymore. Why don't we ask for addresses anymore? Okay, let me just say this. People my generation and younger, I ask you to make a confession publicly. How many of you do not check your mail every day? We don't go to the mailbox every day. I go to my mailbox maybe like once every 3 days. How many of you confess that you don't check your mail every day? There ain't nothing in there. Ain't nothing in there but bills, and most of my bills I don't even pay in there. They come to me electronically. Ain't nothing in the mail no more. Nothing I want. It's just a bunch of flyers, right? Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. So we don't want mailing addresses because the reality of it is people don't look at their mail anymore. How many of that's news to you? People don't look at their mail anymore. That's okay. It's all right. It's a phenomenon. Remember I talked about trends and we keep on track of the trends. It's one of the trends that we picked up on, that people don't look at their mail anymore. We're like, what? But then Eric's like, people don't look at their mail anymore? And my husband is like this marketing guru, and he just laughed because he knew people don't look at their mail anymore. And he's like, when was the last time you went to the mailbox? I'm like, I don't know. I probably ought to go today. Might be a check in there, right? So how do people communicate if they're not communicating through snail mail? Email? You want to contact someone, what do? Do you email them? You text them. So do you know there are free texting services that you can get? Just like Google free texting services, okay, on your phone. And usually if you keep it under a certain number, they'll be free. And if you do have so many numbers, which is like over 100 or 1,000, you can pay. It's not expensive. You can do that monthly, or different ones have like one-time subscriptions or monthly subscriptions. So you really have to look at what your church wants to do and decide what is best for your church and for your faith community, okay? But it can be very cheap. And so we would have the egg hunt. The day after the egg hunt, because we would have a community lag, between a 1 week lag between the egg hunt and Easter Sunday. So after the egg hunt, we would email, we hope you had a great time at the egg hunt, First United Methodist Church. Thank you for coming. That was it. Why was that our first text to them? Gratitude. How many of you want to go back to a church where all they want is for you to come and sit in their pews? Okay? We have to be so careful. We have to be so careful. Raise your hand if you're grateful that people come to our outreach event. This is not a sham. But we're putting the gratitude first. That's all you have to do. Use that texting service. Thank you so much for coming. We hope you had a good time. And sometimes I'll put, if it's a new outreach event, if you have any feedback for us or ways we can improve this event, call the church office at okay? Because sometimes things are happening with my outreach event that I don't know about and I need to know about. Okay, fair enough? So all of a sudden, we look like we are grateful, that we want to get better, and that we care. How many of you want your church to have that image right off the bat? First time, yeah, first time exposure to your church. Remember, this is a what? A first date. Okay? And then, let's see, about it may even be Saturday that we send, the night before Easter, Saturday morning, a week from the egg hunt, we send out a text that says, if your family has nowhere to worship tomorrow, we want to invite you to our Sunday morning worship services that will happen at these times. How many of you think that's not threatening? If you have somewhere to go, that's fine. Go to church with your grandma. Go to church with grandpa. Go to church at your home church. We're not thieves, right? We're not sheep stealers. Plenty of lost sheep. We don't need to steal anybody else's sheep, right? If you have somewhere to go, go. Go with God. Go with our blessing. But if you don't have anywhere to go, if you are unattached, we invite you. Okay? How many of you know how you put that makes all the difference? Okay? So now you have, and this is a great thing, they don't want your text, they just say take me off the text list, and your church doesn't even know. No hard feelings. Okay? But then and who were we targeting at an egg hunt? Who? Children, family with children. Guess what we would send out a week before Vacation Bible School? We would use that same list. Okay? All right. We're having Vacation Bible School. All right. Texting. You can use it to advertise upcoming events, your church services, and make sure your follow-up is relevant. So again, concert, our number 2 event was what? VBS. Okay. So we would have actually at the concert a table where people could register for VBS. Does that make sense? They could get all that paperwork, that Safe Sanctuaries paperwork that we talked about, filled out before the concert. Okay, because you can't just leave your kid with us, right? We need some info first, right? And so this is how you get the 1,000 points of light. Is this making sense to you? Keep your databases as current and up to date as possible. And this is all what? Administrative, right? Who would have thought administrative organization was the key to growing your church? Sounds kind of depressing and sad, but in a sense it is. So when we were in Columbia, there was this new cool kid church on the block, right? And guess what they did constantly? Texting the young people, we're having this event. 3 Cheese did that constantly. That's how they did it. You can keep up with those new cool kids, can't you? This is how they're doing it. I just want you to know this is how they're doing it. How many of you, no one ever told you this is how the cool kids are doing it? All right? I want you to know, just because we're a mainline denomination doesn't mean we can't use the same resources as some of our what I lovingly call other churches, new churches in different expressions are showing up. All right. How many of you, your brains are full and you just want some great outreach ideas? Here is my list of some of my favorite outreach ideas. Are you ready? John's going to send out these PowerPoints to you so you do not have to write furiously if you do not want to. American Girl dolls. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. American Girl doll tea. How many of you think that people in your community would probably... Yes, right? If you do this, if you have a small church and you can't fit that many people around the table, you have to have 2 or 3 seatings of the tea. Does that make sense what I'm saying? If you don't have the facility to do it, you have to do it in waves, all right? I don't even know where my list is. Okay, touch-a-truck. How many of you know what touch-a-truck is? Raise your hand if you do know what a touch-a-truck is. Raise your hand if you have no clue what a touch-a-truck is and you don't, it sounds dirty. All right. So, Paw Patrols, right? How many of you know that is like the little kids love Paw Patrols. It's based off of cars, right? These little puppies that have wings on it through mobility things, right? So what you do is you call up your police, your fire station, you say, we're having a touch-a-truck, would you come and bring your vehicles and stand with them and let kids sit in them? It's called a touch-a-truck, okay? And then you do the same thing with I mean, any kind of vehicle thing, farm tractors, farm vehicles. How many of you know somebody in your church who has a tractor? Where are my rural people? Okay, backhoes, anything, sports cars, anything that kind of has wheels, we're going to invite to sit in our parking lot for 2 hours. We're going to hand out hot dogs, we're going to have a bouncy ride, we're going to have some awesome gift baskets with Paw Patrol stuff in them, okay? How many of you, this is not a hard event. Guess how much it costs people to come and park their truck in your parking lot? Ain't cost nothing. Okay? This is the hot outreach event right now, Touch a Trucks. I'm just going to let you know, this is the emergent event. You know how when Trick or Treat came out, everybody's like, oh, trunk or treat. You want to be the first one to trunk or treat? Touch a Truck is the new trunk or treat. In 3 years, we won't even have Touch a Truck on there. It'll be an old event. I don't want to put it in front of you. All right? ACON's still relevant. There are some things that are timeless. But, for example, if you already have a lot of ACONs, consider getting glow-in-the-dark eggs, nighttime ACON. Go and glow ACON, at night glow ACON. The ACON that we had, we just felt really missional about it. We started a section for adults with special needs at the ACON. Okay? We had an ACON section for kids with sensory issues. It was kind of off and, you know. So think, you can take an old thing and make it new. Isn't that what Jesus does? Amen. All right. So if you're doing a same old, just see if you can't add a new twist to it. Princess and pirate parties. This is hot right now too. Disney. If Disney's doing it, you should think about getting on board. Disney is a trendsetter, all right? So our newest little thing we're working on in churches is pirate and princess parties. Appeals to boys and girls. The American Girl doll tee, you're probably only gonna get what? Girls at. So we're kind of evolving that with this pirate and princess party.
What that is.
What? Well, they dress up in their pirate costumes and their princess costumes, and they come and they jump into board in the bouncy house, and you have pirate and princess themed face printing. They can meet Disney princesses and pirates and have their pictures taken with them. Let's see, what else can you do? You can have pirate and princess themed crafts. It's what we know as a fall festival, but with a theme that appeals to the community. Do you see the fall festival in it? But it's cool and new. It's pirates and princesses. Anna and Elsa must be there. Okay? No princess has usurped Anna and Elsa since then. I have that one confirmation from my niece. But do you see how many people are going to bring their little girls out to get their picture taken with Anna and Elsa? Yes? Or to meet Anna and Elsa and the other Disney princesses? Yeah? How many of you know a grandchildren or someone else who would do that? Come to something like that. All right? Rent a venue. How many of you have like bounce plexes? One of the most successful outreaches events I ran is we rented out a movie theater. It was a small community, little local theater. It cost us $75 to rent out the movie theater. Work with small local vendors. That's my advice to you. Okay? Who's in your church? Does someone in your church own something cool that you could rent out and would rent a venue for you cheap? Use your resources, okay? So I love rent a venue events. You can buy them out for a night. Invent your friends. My youth, oh my gosh, I love the youth at the church. They decided to have a Star Wars night, and they showed all the old Star Wars movies because they had discovered from talking to us old people that they had never seen the 3 original Star Wars movies on the big screen. They've only seen them in DVD in their homes. Think about that. Like, I would have never in 100 years thought about that. I don't even like Star Wars. I'm just being honest with you. I don't even like those movies. I still don't believe that Luke and Leia are brother and sister, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Breakfast with Santa. Sausage, pancakes, picture with Santa. You get the free picture of Santa with the label on the back of the picture with your Christmas Eve times on the way out the door. Okay. And then we had like Frosty the Snowman there, and just, you can do it out. Elves, we had little elves there and stuff like that, you know, so it was fun. A taste of, this is the first event that my husband and I are working on with the church that we'll be charging. How many of you know the taste of whatever events, the local restaurant? Yeah. What is always at the taste of events? Remember I told you this? Alcohol. So we're working really hard to market this correctly so people don't come and be disappointed that there's no wine or beer at this taste of event. But these are, how many of you know these are super trendy now? Okay? Trend. We're just taking it and going with it. Let's see. What else do I have here? Tailgate parties. How many of you live close to your high school? Your church is close to your high school?
Well, kind of.
Tailgate events. Free food. Just invite your friends. All right. School fairs, back to school fairs. Make sure you're in a community that is not going to be offended that you're offering them free school supplies. Some communities are going to be offended by this. Be very careful. Free rummage. How many of you have rummage sales? Okay, my church had a rummage sale. They made like $200 on it. Let's just give this stuff away, okay? Let's see, what else do we have? Babysitting, free babysitting. Christmas time. Okay. Father-daughter dances are a big trend right now. But guess what? We provide the dads if you don't have one. It is cool. And then during your father-daughter dance, during our father-daughter dance, we had a woman in our congregation who was a single mom stand up and share her testimony about how she found men in our church to nurture her son. And then we invited them back for a small group of single moms or divorced parents, divorce support group. Do you see how these 1-2 events work? Make sure they relate, make sure they make sense. It was just the most cool, fun, amazing night. All right. Safety night, that's a police, fire department focused night. Okay. These kids are obsessed with our first responders, and rightfully so, yes, our community heroes. Let's see. And again, it depends on the community you live with. So your church does an outreach event. It's called Vacation Bible School. Vacation Bible School. How many of you, most of the kids who attend your Vacation Bible School don't go to your church? Outreach, all right? Fifth quarter parties, so football games, youth afterwards, okay? Now, I'm going to say this about youth events. Do not expect your youth to do what you did when you were a youth. Video game tournaments, okay? Pizza, always food. Don't ever throw anything for youth without food. Ever, ever, ever. And Pepsi. It just is who they are. Who knows what Humans versus Zombies is?
The Dungeon Dragons.
No. Anybody know what Humans versus, do you know what it is?
It's like a contest, you know, they go out and hunt each other.
They do. They go out and hunt each other with Nerf guns.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
What? Yeah, don't even go there.
Nerf guns. If it's not appropriate to your context, guess what? Don't do it. If you're not comfortable with it, guess what? Don't do it. All I can tell you is in the suburban setting, in the suburban or rural setting, in the rural church where everybody has a gun, it's not a big deal, okay? How many of you know there are communities where everybody has a gun? If you don't have two, there's something wrong with you, okay? They're out there. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the culture you're in, okay? The very first night, this is a youth program with like 5 kids in it, okay? First, the youth pastor came to me, I want to do this, and I'm like, okay, we're going to have to be careful how we do this, but we did it.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Explain
explain what that is? We didn't hear it.
Here, it's basically a Nerf gun thing.
What?
Nerf guns, like the foam Nerf guns, okay?
I have grandkids.
The shoot foam dart.
Foam darts.
Yeah.
250 high school kids that we had never seen before. You don't have to like it, but I'm sharing what has worked. You brought me here to share what works with you. If it doesn't work in your context, in your community, that's okay. I'm not saying it has to work in your context, in your community, but it is appropriate in some places and it gets results. Yes?
Can you explain what you mean by results?
It gets people to come. People come.
People come.
People come.
So
People come.
I'm glad that you're saying that, because sometimes people will think, okay, well, you got 500 people to come, you got 1,000 people to come, but nobody joined the church.
First
So
date.
what's the point of-
First date. I took 500 kids on a first date, or 120, or 200 kids on a first date. We had one of our kids who is a member of our youth group stand up and say, "I'm happy you came to my church tonight." He prayed and he invited them back to youth group on Sunday. We had another outreach thing going on after that for the youth, okay? Your youth aren't going to do what you did. They live in a down and dirty world, okay? And I'm not advocating anything or any particular view or political view or anything like that. I'm just telling you, you are not going to attract the youth with the same thing that we did when we were youth. That's just the reality of the world we live in. Okay? All right, and then free car washes. Okay? While you're getting washed, yes, ma'am.
In my church, we started a new outreach ministry. It's martial arts ministry. We give the class free for the kids. Martial arts is very expensive class, and all the low-income kids can't afford it. So we
Yes.
offer free class. The church offered the transportation free, and we start with only 5 kids. Right now we have like 45, 30 kids every Monday.
Yep, that's a felt need in your community. We can't afford to do this thing for my kid that I want to do. The church is providing it. Felt need. Is that appropriate in every community? Okay? And that is what I really want to hammer home with you. Make sure you know your community and the needs of your community, or you're sunk from the beginning. Okay? Some of these events do cross over in multiple contexts. Some of them, the context is very, very specific, as warranted by the response I got from Human vs. Zombies. And that's okay. That's okay. I'm not offended by it. Doesn't work for you, don't do it. I'm good with that. I'm cool. We're cool. Okay? But it did give a church a new lease on a youth program who had no youth program before.